Imagine the most powerful city on Earth, 6 million people, gas lamps on cobblestone streets, the grandest buildings money could buy, an empire stretching across every continent. Now, imagine that same city has no clean water, no sewage system, streets running with waste, a river so polluted it catches fire, air so thick with coal smoke that thousands choke to death every single winter. That is Victorian London. Both things at once, the most magnificent and the most lethal city in the world. And the question is, how did ordinary people survive it? Not the queen, not the lords, the factory worker, the street child, the woman taking in laundry 14 hours a day. How did they wake up every morning in one of the most dangerous places a human being has ever lived and keep going? Let's walk in. Start with the air. Victorian London ran entirely on coal. Every house, every factory, every train, and all of that coal produced a permanent choking blanket of black and yellow smoke that hung over the city every single day. On bad days, it mixed with fog to create something Londoners called a pea super, a thick yellow-green smog so dense you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. People walked into the Thames, horses fell off bridges, and the people breathing it in, coal particles coated their lungs. Bronchitis, pneumonia, and respiratory disease killed thousands every winter. Not occasionally, every year, like clockwork. But the air wasn't even the worst of it. The water was. For most of the Victorian era, London's drinking water came from the Thames, the same Thames that also received the city's sewage, the same Thames that received runoff from slaughterhouses, tanneries, and chemical factories, the same river that in the summer of 1858 produced a smell so unbearable that Parliament had to evacuate the building entirely. They called it the Great Stink, and people were drinking from it, which brings us to cholera, waterborne, fast, and brutal. In its worst form, it could kill a healthy adult in less than a day. Victorian London had 4 major outbreaks. In 1849 alone, over 14,000 people died. And here's the darkest twist. The medical establishment believed disease came from bad air. So, their response to cholera outbreaks was to clean up the smell, which sometimes meant flushing more sewage into the Thames. They were making it worse while trying to fix it. And they had no idea. It took one doctor, John Snow, to figure out the truth. During the 1854 outbreak in Soho, he mapped every single death in the neighborhood and traced them all back to one water pump on Broad Street. He convinced the council to remove the pump handle. The outbreak stopped. He'd just discovered, essentially alone, that cholera was waterborne. The establishment ignored him for years, but he was right. And that one decision, removing a single pump handle, saved more lives than any medicine available at the time. So, how did ordinary Londoners survive cholera before anyone understood what caused it? Many didn't. But those who did were often, without knowing it, doing things that accidentally protected them. Drinking boiled water for tea. Drinking beer instead of water from the river. Not because they understood germ theory, they had no concept of it. But generations of habit had pushed them toward things that happened to be safer. Survival sometimes looked like doing the right thing for entirely the wrong reason. Now, let's talk about the streets, because the streets were their own kind of disaster. London at its peak had hundreds of thousands of horses, each producing roughly 20 pounds of waste per day. Do that math, and you get streets that were essentially a continuous carpet of manure, especially in wet weather when it mixed with the mud in the gutters. An entire class of workers existed specifically because of this. Crossing sweepers, often young children, whose whole job was to clear a path across the street so wealthier people could cross without ruining their clothes. They survived on tips, sometimes a few coins, sometimes nothing at all, because surviving Victorian London depended almost entirely on where you started. The wealthy had clean water piped in from better sources, servants, fresh food, doctors on call, country houses to escape to. When the city got bad, they suffered too. Victorian medicine was primitive, but they lived longer and had options. The poor had none of this. In the East End, families of 6 or 8 lived in a single room, no running water, a shared outdoor privy for an entire building, children working from the age of 4 or 5, and always, looming over everything, the workhouse, the last resort for anyone who fell into absolute destitution. Families separated, uniforms, hard labor, deliberately miserable by design, on the theory that comfort would encourage laziness. The terror of ending up there was, for many people, the single greatest motivating force in their lives. So, how did the poor actually survive? The same way poor people have always survived, through each other. Street markets ran every day selling food at the lowest possible prices. Bruised fruit, offcuts of meat, day-old bread. Not charity, just an economy that grew up around the price of survival. And neighbors looked out for each other in ways that are almost impossible to imagine today. If a family hit crisis, father injured, mother sick, money gone, the street would often pull together, meals shared, children taken in, rent covered by the collective scraping together of a dozen households who couldn't really afford it either. Not because of programs or organizations, just because the person next door was a person. There was also the pub, and I know that sounds almost funny, but the Victorian working-class pub was genuinely important. It was warm when homes weren't. Beer was often cheaper and safer than water from the river. It was the community center, the job board, the newsroom, and the warm room all in one. But here's the part that matters most. Victorian London didn't just survive its own worst conditions, it changed them. Edwin Chadwick documented in brutal statistical detail exactly how bad things were. Life expectancy in the slums, death rates for children under 5, the link between dirty water and disease. He was mocked and ignored, but his numbers were right. Joseph Bazalgette designed and built 1,100 miles of underground sewers that redirected the city's waste away from the drinking water. It took decades. It cost a fortune. When it was finished, cholera essentially disappeared from London. One stubborn engineer, one massive project, hundreds of thousands of lives saved. And the reformers who focused on children changed what society was willing to accept. Before them, a 5-year-old dying in a chimney flue was just a fact of life. After them, slowly, fought at every step, it became unacceptable. So, here's the answer to where we started. How did people survive Victorian London? The woman who boiled her water without knowing why. The crossing sweeper who cleared one more path for one more coin. The neighbors who covered each other's rent when there was nothing left. The pub that was warm when everything else wasn't. The doctor who mapped a neighborhood and found the truth. The engineer who spent his life underground so the people above could drink clean water. They survived the way humans have always survived the impossible, not through any single act of genius or luck, but through 10,000 small decisions, 10,000 small kindnesses, 10,000 people refusing to give up when the city gave them every reason to. Victorian London should have been unsurvivable. For many, it was. But for the ones who made it through, they didn't just survive, they built the foundations of the world you're living in right now. Every piece of public health infrastructure you take for granted, clean water, sewage systems, child labor laws, every single one was paid for in the lives of people who lived without them first. That's not history, that's a debt. If this changed how you see the world you live in, that's exactly why this channel exists. My question for you this week: which part of Victorian London do you think would be the hardest to survive? The air, the water, the poverty, or the disease? Drop it in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.